Hello, folks. My name is Sam Van Kopp. I'm with Republican Veterans Against Trump. I'll be your host for tonight's podcast. We have an exceptionally qualified person today for our first inaugural podcast. Our guest is not only a 29-year veteran of the Marine Corps and Reserves and a retired colonel. He served in both Beirut in 1982 and Iraq in 2003. He's also a scholar with a doctorate from Boston University and an educator who recently retired as director of the Ethics and Character Development Program at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. He is a fellow he has been a fellow of the Carnegie Council of Ethics. He's the author of the book Soldiers and Civilization: How the Profession of Arms Fought and Thought the Modern World into Existence. He's also written How to Think Like an Officer. I can think of no better person to talk to about President Trump's candidacy in this all-important election cycle. So I am speaking, of course, about Mr. Reed Bonadonna. Thank you very much, Reed, for joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'd like to dive a bit more into your service record in a minute, but first, right off the top, I'd like to talk a little bit about why you felt it was important to be vocal about your opposition to President Trump in this election cycle.
Okay. Well, I think it would be disastrous if Donald Trump was elected to a second term for starters, and I think that we veterans and for that matter people who are still in the military have a stake in this and have a voice in this. What one possible consequence of Donald Trump being reelected is that he has stated that he wants to make himself a dictator, and I think he will make the effort to do so, whether he's completely successful or not. But we could potentially lose our democracy for decades, even permanently, if he has support of the legislature, of the Supreme Court. He could cement his own party in power in a way that would be very, very difficult to dislodge them from. I believe Donald Trump has demonstrated that he is a threat to national security. And some of the things he's said about curtailing environmental controls on industry suggested he may also be a global threat. That the implications of American industry being able to operate without any controls or with reduced controls on the kind of environmental impact that they have could be devastating. So take your pick. The consequences are dire. The stakes are high, and we need to weigh in.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, of course. And I think it's a very important point that even if not successful, some of these efforts towards authoritarianism could have long-term damaging effects for the country. We've certainly seen authoritarian autocrats in countries like Hungary do things like this, roll back the democratic process and entrench, if not the person, then the party in power for years and years. I wanted to speak a bit about what you were concerning there about a veteran sort of responsibility or what their role is in the political process. How you see that element. How should you think veterans be vocal in their positions?
I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was the head of another organization, nonpartisan organization of politically active veterans. Actually, his name was Scott Cooper. He was also a Marine veteran, and this a few years ago. And he said that he thought that just in the past few years, veterans had somehow become smarter and better looking than we ever used to be, and people were actually paying attention to us, and we were respected. There was polling that indicated we were one of the most respected institutions, and as individuals too. There's this anybody who's out in the civilian community and sometimes reveals that they're a military veteran understands that most Americans do respect that. So we have a voice, and I've also said that frankly sometimes civilians ascribe to us virtues beyond our real deserts. We are not all paragons of virtue. We're fairly ordinary people who've chosen this path at one time or another in our lives, and we're not knights or saints, but if there was, whether the respect people have for us is completely deserved or not, if there was ever a time for us to capitalize on this and to use our voice, I think this is it. And of course, part of the reason why we should be heard on this issue is because the president is also the commander-in-chief of all the armed forces. The armed forces of the United States are arguably the most powerful in the globe, possibly the most powerful in the history of the globe. Well equipped, well trained, capable of performing in a variety of missions. So thinking about the employment of the armed forces is our area of expertise. And we, I think, have something to say about a person of Donald Trump's demonstrated character, his past record, his statements about what he intends for the armed forces, his actions in his first term as commander-in-chief, I think paint a very potentially grim picture.
And I think that's a great point. It's also, I was thinking about that. Obviously, an individual soldier can't be public in their concerns, or because, of course, they're still serving.
Right.
So in a way, yeah, it is that veteran sort of responsibility who has that past experience to share some of those concerns that might otherwise be silent. I'm thinking particularly about General Mattis's resignation during Trump's term because of his erratic actions concerning policy in Syria and Afghanistan. And so yeah, I think that veteran insight into military roles, responsibility, and costs is a huge aspect of the advocacy. I'd like to, with that, turn back to your service record and career. I mentioned the two great sort of very famous storied bookends of American involvement in the Middle East. I wonder if you'd start by telling us a bit about your time in Beirut, 1982.
Sure. I was an infantry officer. I was commissioned as an infantry officer. I asked for it, actually. That's what I wanted to do. And but by the time the Beirut mission came along, we were on Medfloat, my battalion, which was 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. I was the executive officer of Golf Company of 2-8. We were the first battalion to go into Lebanon, and things went fairly well during our tour there. Then we were relieved by other units, and the mission continues. And of course, as anyone who knows the history of that operation could tell you, things went south after a time, and really, I believe that assigning so small an American force, which was obviously going to be a target based on the perception of America in its region, a lot of people giving a single battalion a mission implicitly of trying to control a situation which extended over an entire region and involved hundreds of thousands of armed fighters in various factions was more than even the Marines could do. And but I was well out of it, frankly, by the time things went so badly.
And I wonder then if you would contrast that or compare that to your time in 2003.
Oh, sure.
So in the initial invasion of Iraq, then the similarities and differences.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, for some reason, I was one of the first people to cross the line of departure, and again, in that circumstance, that turned out to be a fairly good place to be, because in the case of Lebanon and in the case of Iraq, things started off fairly well, and then by the time things got more complicated, more violent, involving more loss of life on all sides. My unit had been pulled out, and again, I mean, probably prematurely, people underestimating the amount of military force which was needed to accomplish a mission. I was assigned to a Marine brigade, calling itself at the time Task Force Tarawa, as a field historian. So I was sort of out there to cover the waterfront. I conducted a lot of interviews. I took some pictures, gathered some data. It was a very interesting assignment. I could go pretty much wherever I could catch a ride to. I was in a way responsible to no one. I had no one working for me. So if I knew there was a unit that had been involved in some significant action, I would try to frag a helicopter, get a ride on a Humvee, and go out there and interview as many of the Marines who'd been involved as I could. And it was sobering at times. It was inspiring at times. We were witnesses to tragedy, the tragedy that had been Iraq, I'd say, for the previous 30 years, and of course, the fighting had been very violent too. And when we entered the country, and there's no denying that. But I will say that, I mean, in terms of lessons learned for me personally, and I kept a journal, by the way, when I was in Iraq, which is still kind of a prized possession of mine and has been somewhat useful to the historians who covered the operation since that time. But I think one of the lessons I took away was, and we've been talking about this, the fragility of democracy. Both of these countries, Lebanon and Iraq, had sort of experimented with democratic regimes following a colonial period, and in both cases, these democratic regimes had collapsed and given way in one case to open civil war, which was sort of still going on when we went there, and in the other case to an extremely brutal, almost biblical dictatorship by Saddam Hussein. So I did get the sense that I think that democracy is a relatively stable form of government, in that its power rests on a broad base of popular consent, but it is not inevitable, and it is not always secure if too few people in the society are willing to do what's necessary to support the democracy as a democracy, as a democratic form of government, preferable to all others. So that was one piece that I think I realized in both, and also maybe particularly on my second tour, I maybe sort of paradoxically, I got the sense from Iraq in kind of an emotional and personal way that really we are all brethren, that all people, if you get underneath the veil of culture and circumstance, so many things we share. We want the best for our children. We want to be to have fulfilling work to do, to feel useful and respected. I had a couple encounters when I was in Iraq that kind of drove this point home for me, and it's one of those things that, as Shakespeare says, old men forget, and I have forgotten much, but that's one of those lessons that I try to continue to remind myself of, that even with all the differences that might separate us, even within a single country, this common humanity can shine forth if you let it and if you look for it.
That is profound, and I think your experience there in the position that you were in '03, giving such a scope for speaking to different people and traveling as you see fit
Yes.
across the battle space. It must be a unique perspective. Thank you very much for that. I wonder on the point about democracies requiring people to support and stand up for it. How do you think that engagement, best occurs when you say like people do need to fight for this this fragile democratic edifice? Like, how do we do that in a moderate, helpful way to
Well,
prevent,
yeah.
the extremes?
There are a lot of things that people can do. I mean, you're doing one by organizing this group. I don't know what sort of inspired you, or what gave you the impetus that this was a necessary thing. I mean, now we're sort of down to the wire, so it may, or getting there. So it may be a little late to stand up a new organization, even though it might arguably be needed. I think for the average person, for the ordinary person, there's you can write postcards, you can participate in phone banking or text banking. Most communities, towns will have organizations like the Democratic Party or Indivisible, that organize volunteers to do these things. The one that I prefer, and which is supposed to be, according to the data, the most effective, is canvassing, going from door to door. And I was doing this a few days ago, and I plan to travel and do some more of it in Pennsylvania next. We'll starting later this week. So I know that people are intimidated by the idea of knocking on a stranger's door. I'll say that the great majority of the contacts I have with people when they do answer the door and they're willing to talk have been very positive. Some of them have been moving, and you hear some sad stories too. I've compared it to sort of like speed dating, but without the dating. You get to meet. Not that I've never actually done speed dating, but I've seen it depicted in a sitcom, I think. And anyway, but you get to meet this cross section of humanity in a short period of time, and you hear people's stories. When people find out that I'm a veteran, sometimes that's a foot in the door moment. I'll say to all veterans, if that comes up, that is something that most people will respect and will maybe pay a little bit more attention to you than they would to somebody else, just because you got that label. Whatever you did, whatever your service consisted of, they kind of, and somewhat rightly, they lump us together, because really it's about the willingness to serve, and not necessarily what your particular job or your rank or how many deployments you had or whatever. Those things are sometimes just the luck of the draw. So I had a lady once bring out a picture of her World War II veteran father in uniform when she found out that I was a veteran. I had another lady I was canvassing with another man, and lady blowing kisses at us, thanking us for canvassing. I had a woman on the doorstep, almost in tears, because political differences had made the relations in her family so difficult. She felt it was getting hard for them to get together for a family dinner or a holiday or something, because these political differences, I guess, rent her family apart. And I had no answer for that. Lucky in my own case that my family is, I'd say, in broad agreement about most political things as they're playing out right now. But I know people for whom that's not the case.
It is one of the hardest things, I think, to overcome, is that sort of the depth of the internal strife, especially when it affects your family. And
Yeah.
I can't echo your statements on canvassing enough. for any viewers who are watching this now, it is a profoundly human experience. And you may knock on 100 doors, and you may get one person out of that 100 that actually wants to engage, but that makes it all so worth it by itself. And it gets back to your idea, Reed, about people being the same all over the world, right? Same more or less when in terms of their needs, their wants, and being decent people in the most part. And actually, this gives us an opportunity to talk a bit about your work as a teacher as well at the academy, because it plays, I think, into the character and the ethics angle of instruction. So I wonder if you tell us a bit about how that instruction works. I think maybe a lot of people watching might think of character as something you either have or you don't, and not something that's maybe developed or developable. And since
Right,
character is a big issue in this election, I think it's something that people might want to hear about.
right. Well, when it came to the ethics instruction at Kings Point, I see by the poster in the background that you are a West Point graduate, I'm
Yeah,
guessing. You know,
different
and
academy.
was that?
Same idea.
Yeah, but I mean the other academies, the big academies, have for ethics and leadership will have a building
Hmm.
full of PhDs and master sergeants, lieutenant colonels, you know, all working towards this goal. At Kings Point, they had me, and pretty much a one-man show. And the the curriculum at Kings Point is extremely tight. They all get a Bachelor of Science degree. They're at sea for a full year out of the 4, so they're accomplishing this in 3 years, and they all have to take and pass the mariner's license exam, which is no joke, and takes a lot of preparation to accomplish. And on top of that, it is run as a military school. They do a certain amount of training and drill, and there's a band. We have parades, and so I tried a number of different things to try to get some ethics into the curriculum. I created some new courses. I tried to get some time during the after hours portion of the day, which is called Reg period, to get midshipmen together to talk about leadership and ethics. One of my roles as ethics director, at least in my case, was to be the faculty advisor for the honor board, which of course all academies have some kind of an honor system. So, you know, try to make the honor code not just a matter of, you know, don't like, cheat, and steal, but in fact the broader concept of honor as something that we try to talk to midshipmen about, and have them talk to each other among themselves, because that's really where the rubber meets the road at any academy. You know, what do the cadets or midshipmen think that honor demands in a given situation? Is that a factor with them? How much weight does it hold? You know, how much are they willing to do to uphold those kinds of standards? So yeah, I team taught with a couple of other professors, mostly in the humanities departments, trying to incorporate through literature, through history, examples of ethics, of leadership, and the two are related, I think. And so
And so
yeah,
coming from
that was the challenge.
so coming from that background, and also your work with the Carnegie Council of Ethics,
Right,
like how do you see character and ethics is a big subject in this election because of President Trump's
right,
past actions.
right.
Like, how do you see that sort of coming from that character background? What are the threats and concerns? What should the nation be thinking about?
Well, Donald Trump's character, I think, could be an issue, and I'm surprised at the people who want to sort of keep this off the page. I mean, among other things, he is a convicted felon. He has been convicted in civil court of sexual assault. He is engaged in behavior, his handling of highly classified materials, for example, which is extremely dangerous to national security. his demeanor, his approach strikes me as someone who takes pleasure in other people's discomfiture. He isn't a good person.
Yeah.
And do we want someone like this holding the reins of power, who seems to feel so little of that sense of a common humanity, of a common lot that we have to guide his actions and his decisions in office. I would say that kind of thing is it's vital for an officer. It's vital for almost probably for anyone, but certainly I mean in a variety of roles. If someone loses that sense, to the extent that Donald Trump seems to have, although I'm not sure he ever possessed it, this person is dangerous.
Yeah.
And giving them power, the kind of power which the president of the United States can wield is extremely unwise.
And what's remarkable to me about this, most particularly, is how many folks who have worked for him directly and resigned in protest or been discharged after speaking out come to that same conclusion about the lack of ethics and character and capacity leading to a poor performance, erratic performance, and danger for the United States. We mentioned General Mattis a moment ago. General Kelly is also very famous for speaking out about Trump's unfitness for office. But perhaps the one that ties the most, I think, to our conversation about military performance ethics and the role of the military in civilization, as your book talks about, is a quote from Trump's Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, when he said that, quote, "The president has very little understanding of what it means to be in the military, to fight ethically, or to be governed by a uniform set of rules and practices." One of the quotes from your statement on our website, Reed, talked about a misconception about soldiers as just sort of a killing machine, or not having that sense of ethic and purpose. I wonder if you'd talk a bit about that and how what seems to be Trump's misperception of the military ethic, could have consequences for the United States.
Right. Well, I think Trump referred to military members as killing machines on the occasion of his pardoning Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher for the charge of murder. That I'm not sure at what point in the court-martial proceedings Trump weighed in, but I can't remember whether he'd been convicted at this point or not. But this was, of course, an extremely serious charge, and Trump absolved Gallagher for any responsibility for it, and even, if memory serves, weighed in to ensure that Gallagher was allowed to keep his Navy SEAL pin, which is something which is normally among the SEAL community something that they take seriously because it's hard won, and this is when Trump said, "Well, they're killing machines, so why don't we, why should we find fault with this person who, after all, killed?" And so I mean, profound. I mean, I don't think any second lieutenant or PFC would make this kind of statement, except maybe if he'd had a couple of drinks and he was hanging around the squad bay with his mates and trying to sound tough. As the secretary said, we fight by rule. We are not thugs or marauders. We are soldiers. And okay, my fellow Marines wouldn't like me to hear me call myself a soldier, but let's say soldiers of the sea. That's a term that's been applied to us. We are perhaps we are warriors. Some people use that term, but we We fight by rule. We fight under command. We do not wage private battles. We serve a larger entity, the military unit, the country that that our military force belongs to. And I think that this kind of observance is particularly important if you're a military person in the service of a democracy, because this introduces the rule of law, and of course, in our own case, our constitutional oath. Trump seems to consider us to be a kind of a Praetorian Guard, or a palace guard, where he can tell us to do anything he wants, untrammeled by military codes, by our codes of behavior, by the long tradition, which hopefully informs us at times. I mean, soldiers have been devising codes of conduct for thousands of years, and in the West, this arguably goes back to the Iliad, which the ancient Greeks basically considered to be a military manual. A manual of how to act and not to act whilst under arms, and it's been since then Roman military law, codes of chivalry, laws of armed conflict, which started to develop in the 17th century, international codes like Geneva. There is this rich tradition of soldiers who have, with help from educators and writers, who have had almost a universal understanding that crosses continents and other boundary lines, an understanding that there was something about their profession which required them to develop these codes of restraint, and which had to do with the proper exercise of leadership, of the power over others that military leaders have at times, and which is almost unique, military command. Where else do you see that except possibly at sea? And and Trump has no understanding of any of this, and any plebe at West Point, I think, knows more about military ethics than the potential commander in chief, and that's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, it goes without saying, I think, that a person who has authority and control over the military, over that huge use of, or that huge capacity to use force, but doesn't understand that principle that force should be used for the benefit of the democracy is very dangerous. Trump is famous also for upbraiding his generals, including General Milley. Why aren't you like the German generals, right? Which is A, historically inaccurate when he's what he's talking about, but B, I mean, it's an incredible insight into the man's character, the bankruptcy of his own ethical code. I guess to wrap up, if we could talk a bit about how you find it sort of most useful in trying to talk to friends and family who are also from a conservative background, but maybe Trump supporters. Like, what do you find is most useful for trying to engage them, think about this issue in this election? It's a very difficult, big question, but it's something that I think a lot of conservatives who are in our shoes are thinking about.
Well, I think, first of all, they may not want to hear this, but to call support of Trump conservative is a wild misnomer. He is anything but. This is someone who is it seems to have no respect for history, for the America's past, for the institutions that have developed over centuries to preserve our democracy, to make it effective in functioning, to make it compliant and responsive to the will of the people. He is talking about dismantling a lot of these institutions. So what is he conserving, except for a broad gap in wealth as it exists in this country, racial difference. This is not conservatism. These are to go back to an earlier time, these are in fact radical Republicans as the party exists now, or at least as it's expressing itself. I hope there are Republicans out there who are, after Trump's performance in the campaign in the last couple of months, who are starting to have second thoughts about that.
Yeah, certainly we can hope, and we definitely need that for the country. Well, thank you, Reed, very much for joining us, speaking to your own experience, speaking to the political moment we're in. I highly recommend, if there are any history buffs out there, that you take a look at his books, Soldiers and Civilization and How to Think Like an Officer. Also great for anyone contemplating military service as well. Reed, thank you very much, sir, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Sure thing.
And tune in next time, folks, for our next podcast from Republican Veterans Against Trump. We'll be interviewing more folks about their positions on the election and their wisdom for the country. Thank you, and God bless.